Okay, this is section 8.3, your second last section of chapter 8. This is your distributive property chapter for algebra. Distributive property, of course, means multiplying a binomial. We don't use trinomials in grade 9. You will eventually in high school. But in this case, multiplying a binomial by a monomial, right? And we do so by using what we call distributive property. So this question says Brock and JA solve the equation 3 multiplied by, or 3 groups of, x minus 4.3 is equal to negative 2.7. And they both did it different ways. How can you do it 2 different ways? Well, JA, he decided that he was just going to straight up expand using distributive property. So 3x's is going to be 3x. 3 negative 4.3 is going to be negative, sorry, not positive, but negative 12.9. So once he expanded that using distributive property, that's the equation you got. And once he did that, he simply added his constant to both sides to get rid of it. You got 3x. Let me bring this down a little bit here. Uh-oh. You then got 3x equals, what's that going to be, 10.2, I think. And then divide both sides by 3, and the answer is 3.4. What's an alternative way I could do it, Lily? Instead of expanding using distributive property, what could I have done to both sides? Right. So if I consider this question 3 groups of x minus 4.3, Brandon, x minus 4.3, there's 3 groups of them. So instead of finding out what 3 groups is equal to, if I divide by 3, I know what 1 group of them is equal to. And dividing both sides by 3 will mean that if 3 groups of x minus 4.3 is equal to negative 2.7, then 1 group of x minus 4.3 will be equal to 0.9. Add 4.3 to both sides, and x will equal 3.4. Which method do you prefer? First one makes more sense, the second one's much easier, right? Question 2 just gives us a question and asks us to solve it. How many of you expanded using distributive property? How many of you just divided both sides by 2 to start? The majority. Let's do it this way. So instead of saying 2 groups of x plus 1.5, I have 1 group of x plus 5 is equal to 3.8. And once I know that, I'm going to subtract 1.5 from both sides, and x will equal 2.3. Right. Alternatively, if you did expand, you get 2x plus 3 equals 7.6. Subtract 3 from both sides, you get 2x equals 4.6. Divide both sides by 2, and x will equal 2.3 still. Your next question, actually your next question could have been written a different way, and in fact I should have probably written it that way just to make it more confusing. I could have written it this way. That's the exact same thing. That negative 1, or that just that negative symbol outside the brackets, they are the same intended meaning. So if I divide both sides by negative 1, I get a positive 2.8 equals x minus 0.65. And then add 0.65 to both sides, and x will equal 3.45. Now we'll skip that question. Well, let's do this. This time we'll expand. We'll see how it works with expansion. 1.8, 0.9. So negative 0.9 equals a negative 0.9 plus 3.6x equals 0.18. Once you have it done like that, add your 0.9 to both sides, you get 3.6x equals 1.08 if you add 0.9 to both sides. And then finally, divide both sides by 3.6. 1.08 divided by 3.6 is 0.3. The next question says half of x plus 1 equals negative 3/4. And this is one of those questions where by now you acknowledge if you have fractions, you can get rid of them by multiplying both sides by a common multiple of denominators, or you can just isolate normally. If I wanted to get rid of this first, I'd multiply this side by 2 and multiply this side by 2, and I'd have just one group of x plus 1 is equal to negative 3/2, or more importantly, negative 1.5. The reason why I wrote it as mixed, because now that I get rid of that constant, x equals simply negative 2.5. So if you started off by multiplying both sides by 2, instead of having half of x plus 1, you have all of x plus 1. And you have to double both sides. Alternatively, if I multiplied this side by 4 and this side by 4, and I cross-reduced, I get two groups of x plus 1. Two groups of x plus 1 when I multiply my numerators, which is 2x plus 2 equals negative 3. 2x equals negative 5. And x will still equal negative 2.5. So there were multiple ways you could do that one. I probably would have just multiplied both sides by 2, but it's up to you. Real quick, a third of x minus 2. Just be aware that a third of x minus 2 could be written as this, or alternatively, it's a third multiplied by x minus 2, which is going to be x minus 2 over 3. So this expression, and this expression are all the same thing. So given that that's true, if I go back in time here, I'm going to write it, I'm going to solve it two different ways. I'm going to write it this way, and I'm going to write it this way. 5 over 2 equals 1/3 x minus 2. So if I say, okay, division first, if I divide this side by a third, I know that instead of having a third of that group, I'm going to have a full group. And 5 over 2 divided by that 1/3 is the same thing as 5 over 2 multiplied by the reciprocal, which would be 15 over 2. Okay, equals x minus 2. So if I simply divide both sides by a third, I get rid of that multiply by a third, using that whole idea of distributive property division first. Since I am going to be adding a whole number, I'm going to change my mixed fraction here to 7.5. And 7.5 plus 2 is going to mean the value of x is 9.5. Right? That's kind of an interesting way to get the answer, but that works out, right? X equals 9.5. Over here, if I change this to this instead, right? Instead of a third of x minus 2, I write it as x minus 2 divided by 3. And I multiply both sides by 6. I'm going to get 15 is equal to two groups of x minus 2. And two groups of x minus 2 will be 2x minus 4. I have to take that x minus 2 and multiply it by 2 using distributive property. Add 4 to both sides, I get 2x equals 19. Divide both sides by 2, and x still equals 9.5. Let's skip ahead a bit. Let's go on to this question here. Elizabeth, what did you do to solve this question? This is, what question is this? Question 9. How many of you multiplied both sides by 6 to start? All right, that's an important one. If you multiply both sides by 3, it's still okay. Let's do it both ways, just to see both in action. So if I multiply it by 3, I know that this happens, and I'm left with two groups of 5 minus x. So multiplying that by 3, multiplying this by 3 will give me 7.5. or, sorry, 3.5, right? Divide both sides by 2, and 5 minus x will equal, oh, actually, I'd have 3.5 there, don't I? Because it's fractions we're working with. 3.5, or 7 over 2 divided by 2, because I divided both sides by 2. That will be, oh, 7 over 2 multiplied by the reciprocal of 2, which is 7 over 4. Okay, so step 1 was multiply both sides by 3. Step 2 was divide both sides by 2. I'm now going to get rid of my constant by subtracting 5 from both sides. 7 over 4, take away 5. 7 over 4 is 1 3/4, take away 5. 1 3/4, take away 1 3/4 is 0. Take away an additional 3 1/4 is negative 3 1/4. Now we're not done yet because we still have to get rid of this negative 1 coefficient. And x will equal 3 1/4. That's a really complex question for multiplying both sides by 3. But Elizabeth said she multiplied both sides by 6, which actually makes it quite a bit easier. Multiplying this side by 6, and multiplying this side by 6. This is really easy because 7 over 6 multiplied by 6 is 7. And if I cross-reduce this, I'm going to have 2 groups of all of this. So 2 groups of 2 multiplied by 5 minus x is going to become 4 groups of 5 minus x. If you want to think of it as being, this is a picture. If I think of it as being a 5 and a minus x, how many of these do I have? I have 2 of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a minus x. So 2 groups of 5 minus x looks like this. And if I double that, I would end up with 4 negative x's and a positive 20, which is, when we expand this, 20 minus 4x equals 7. So we can see how when we have 2 groups of 5 minus 6 and I double it, I would end up with 4 groups of 5 minus x, or 20 minus 4x. And once we have that, we will subtract 20 from both sides. Negative 4x equals negative 13. And divide both sides by negative 4. And x will equal 3 1/4. Same answer.